What's your first remembrance of playing hockey?
Honestly, it's mostly from what my brother and my mom have told me. It's not necessarily coming from memory, which may sound strange, but even when you see pictures when you're little skating, I started skating when I was 2. They tell me I started playing hockey when I was 5, but my first memories of hockey are probably not until 8 or 9.
Do you remember being hurt by something that somebody said to you on the ice, especially early on?
Honestly, I have a pretty good ability to just compartmentalize things and to forget things and not let things bother me. I honestly just looked at it as another obstacle. And so whether a player had to, I'm just telling you how I thought about it. Like if people perceived a certain player as too slow, or people perceived the player as maybe didn't read the game properly, or maybe was too small. And so I looked at it like, okay, people don't think I can do this because of the color of my skin. I'm going to prove them wrong. And so I didn't really look at it as I kind of use it as an energy source, as a way that motivated me. I really didn't allow it to get me down. And I think that is a credit to, my mom and my brother and keeping me focused and probably just the way I'm built, my makeup is that, I'm pretty determined person, pretty focused. And I think that channeling that into sports was crucial for me just as a person. And as you get to know yourself and realize what your strengths and weaknesses are. And for me, it was imperative that I focused on something like that. And hockey was my outlet.
Minor hockey system in Toronto is extremely competitive. Did you ever feel that the color of your skin had anything to do with which teams you made or didn't make?
When they start picking for U16s or they start doing the All Ontarios, I don't know if they even do this stuff anymore, but they used to do like a U14 or U15, U16 team. All those types of teams, I was being overlooked constantly. I don't know how that happens when you end up going to college a year early at 17 and so it just doesn't make sense to me. But there's instances like that where you think you're likely overlooked and passed over, and that was frustrating. But it just kept adding fuel to my motivation to prove people wrong and to keep pushing on and keep getting better.
Did you ever reach a point in your career, or when did you reach a point in your career where you thought that this was no longer an issue, that you've proven yourself and you could just go play your game and decisions were made for the right reasons? Did that ever happen?
Well, 4 years into my pro career, where you walk into a locker room and everyone has these feelings of, I want my teammates to respect me. I want my teammates to know that I'm a good teammate and I care about them and I'm a team first type of guy. The reality is that when you walk into that room as a biracial, half black guy into a dressing room, you've also got to understand that everyone comes to their place with their own biases, with their own prejudices. And so I felt this enormous burden to prove to them that I was a good teammate, that regardless of wherever they grew up and they had these thoughts and that I was going to prove them wrong, that I was going to be, I put this huge amount of pressure on myself to show them that I was a good guy and a good teammate. And then it was I think at a certain point, I realized that it's not my responsibility or my burden. I just have to be myself. And I always used to say, without swearing, I don't know how I'm going to illustrate this, but I always used to say that, if guys thought I was a jerk, that I wasn't a black jerk, I was just a jerk. And so if you don't like, and then after I got to about 25, I didn't really care anymore. I didn't feel that burden to have to prove it to anybody. I was pretty comfortable in my own skin at that point, that I'd proven enough that over time that I could just let my play do the talking. But I think at that point I let that go, which was important for me to take that next step as a leader too in the room.
You talked about burdens. Did you feel any sense of responsibility to other younger Black players coming up to handle yourself in a certain way so that it might clear the way for them a little easier?
No question. I think that also, I think you just do that over time by your actions and being a solid teammate and a solid person. I think that over time, everyone develops a reputation that sometimes is perception and sometimes earned. Sometimes it's a combination of both. And so, I think that the answer to your question is absolutely. I think I felt that, but I enjoyed that responsibility because I felt like, I could be a resource or be someone that younger players looked up to that could say, I could fill that role, and I could be a checking line guy who is responsible and can do the things that I did as a player. So I think I know that it was important for me to see players like, Grant Fuhr, Claude Vilgrain, Tony McKegney, Anson. We played together at Don Mills when we were Bantam. So there were other examples, Nathan Lafayette. There was guys that I looked up to that I certainly was aware of that looked like me, that had similar backgrounds, that helped me understand. And I knew that I could do the same for the next generation coming. And Al McInnes used to have a funny saying. He used to say, "Be nice to the 10-year-olds." And I don't know what he meant when I was 22. And then we were playing Anaheim one night, and there was this big, huge, massive, tough guy for Anaheim that was called up from the minors. And during warm-up, he said to Al that, "Al, I met you when I was 11, and you signed a stick for me." And in the dressing room before the game, Al says, "Well, that's why you're nice to the 10-year-olds, boys," because you knew hopefully he was going to take it a little easy on Al. But I didn't understand what he meant. But when you get to be about 36, 37, 38 in the league, you remember what he said, because it's so true.
Talk about people who've gone through things. Willie O'Ree. When did you first know or hear about Willie O'Ree?
Wow. I think I met Willie the first time at the Ice Hockey in Harlem events in New York, probably in about, I would say, about 20 to 22 years ago, and started to hear about his story and understand. I mean, I did some research to learn about Herb Carnegie, and I knew about Willie, and I knew the history of Black hockey players in the Maritimes and in the Black Hockey League, and I'd heard all those different stories and read enough to know, and just to meet him was remarkable for me, to see that when you meet Willie, you understand why it makes sense for him to do what he's doing, and why it was appropriate that he was the first. There is there's no bitterness in him. He's a happy guy to be around. He brings people in. He makes you feel comfortable, and it's very rare, because you think about what he must have gone through in the 50s. To play the game, to travel, the burden he felt, the times he must have wanted to give up, to be the first. It takes a real special person, and the fact that he has there is no animosity, there's no bitterness in him. He's very grateful, and he's done so much for the game, whether, for all minorities, for everybody to play the game. And so it's appropriate that he's in the Hall of Fame. And I've only been to one induction, and it was his. And he's a special person, and if you've ever had a chance to meet him, he's a great guy to talk to. He's got some great stories.
The way that he was a trailblazer for so many, do you feel like you're taking that up and making sure that you follow that and his lead and the way that he acted in what you're doing and how you handle yourself?
In a tiny way, Mitch, I'll tell you, it's going to take more than Willie, more people than myself to fill those shoes. I think it's going to be a collective effort. I see that happening with 6 or 7 or 8 people trying to fill that what he was able to accomplish. And the positive is that we have more players of color that are able to tell a story and able to talk about it. And I think the most important thing for me is to keep his story alive and keep the memory, what he's done and what he's accomplished around.
With the number of Black and biracial players in the league growing, what would you like to see happen in the future in the minor ranks and from the NHL to see some improvement in that area?
Cool, that's a layered question. I think that there needs to be an educational process. I think we're part of the Players Inclusion Committee that are just presented our recommendations. I can't really go into detail, but our recommendations for the executive committee. I think there needs to be an educational piece that involves owners, managers, coaches, and players and trainers, everyone in the cocoon of what is the NHL life. First thing would be to create a zero tolerance language things that are said in the room that we just eradicate. And I know everyone's so protective and very, very careful about, they're afraid, the hockey purists are almost afraid if they make the game more diverse and inclusive that we're going to take away from what we all believe is special about the game. And I would argue that it's going to make it better. The more diverse the game is, the more inviting. I always found it interesting to meet guys from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan who like country music, and I could tell them about my life growing up in the city. I think the world's a boring place if we just stay in our cocoon and don't try to learn and be uncomfortable.
You talk about educating. Well, you're an educator and an author. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. I have a son who's now 8. When he was 5, I was thinking about writing a book, and I could write this triumphant, sad story, single parent, all this stuff. And I thought, no one wants to read that. Most of the things in my career are positive. And so if I could write something and to inspire and engage kids to pick up a stick or get some skates on, that's what I decided to do. So I started writing these stories, and I would read them to my son. And I actually written 5. We published 1. So I wrote the first one about me learning how to skate in Toronto, living in Main Square, and all the rest of it. And at the end of the book, my son said, well, what happens next? And so I don't know, I gotta go back and write some more. So it ends up being that the reason why I wrote it, to be honest with you, I work for the Blackhawks, and I'm engaged in 3 initiatives that they have. One's called GOAL, which stands for Get Out and Learn, where we visit over 150 schools a year. 70,000 kids get introduced to ball hockey in their phys ed class. Then we have First Stride, where those same kids, after a year of that program, can then come and try skating for the first time at the practice facility, which then flows into our Little Hawks program. So I'm there at each touch point. What we found is those programs don't start till 3rd or 4th grade. So we weren't really talking to the kindergarten to 3rd grade. And so I had this idea, well, what if I were to write a kid's book that has a character that looks like them, where they start to say, hey, maybe I could learn how to skate too, and kind of get them excited about the opportunities that lie ahead in a few years. So those are the two motivational factors why I wrote the book. What I found, Mitch, over the last 8 months, 12 months, is unfortunately, first of all, the book came out in February and then COVID happened in March. But what I found over this short period of time is that I wrote it with the intention to inspire and motivate kids of color to think outside the box of what their life is. That if my vehicle was hockey, theirs could be architecture, dance, whatever they wanted to do. But what I found is that it actually is a vehicle for white families, coaches, teachers, parents, to start to talk about and bring up the issues of diversity and inclusion and how they might become allies in their own homes, in their own everyday life. And so that, I think, to me, is the most amazing thing that's happened organically, is that it's starting a discussion within white families about, okay, listen, that person doesn't look like us. How can we make them feel more comfortable at dance class or at your soccer practice? And so that part has been surprising and very rewarding as well.
Well, I know that you've inspired a lot of people, and you're going to continue to do so through all your work with the Hawks and everything else you do. So thank you for this. And I know there's a lot of people grateful for your all that you've done.
I appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jamal.